Game Boy. And I still remember I wake up on Christmas morning, I race out to the living room, and there I see it. I see the tree, I see the star, and the gift. Christmas carols are playing in the background. I pick it up. The size is just right. It says, "To son from mom." There it is, the Game Boy. I tear off the wrapping, and there are 2 words on the box. Medical kit. Now you might be wondering why my mother would get me a medical kit for Christmas. Well, what I didn't tell you was that my father was a doctor. And for the longest time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor until I saw an autopsy. He took me in to see an autopsy one day, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go a different route. But for a while, that's what I thought I wanted to do, so it makes sense my mother would get me a medical kit for Christmas. But remember that fake happiness that you had to give your dad, right? I look at my mom, okay, thanks mom, whatever. But if you're a parent, you know, you can read your kids' faces, right? You know when they're not authentically happy. My mother just looks at me and she's just annoyed. She says, "Son, open the box." So I do. I open up that medical kit box. What was inside that medical kit? The Game Boy. The Game Boy was inside that medical kit box. So now the smile is real. I give my mom a big hug and say, "Thank you so much." I remember I take it out of the box and I'm about to put batteries inside of it. And then my mother said something to me. She said something that didn't mean much at the time, but meant something so significant so many years later. She looked at me and she said, "Son, I knew you wouldn't like the wrapping, but I knew you'd love the gift." I knew you wouldn't like the wrapping, but I knew you'd love the gift. You see, one of my favorite speakers, her name is Lisa Nichols, and she once said that sometimes in your life, your motivation comes wrapped in sandpaper. You know, sandpaper is really rough. Sometimes the things that you don't want in life contain things that you need, contain gifts within. And of course, at 13, I didn't get that lesson, but I'm thinking years later, that lesson meant so much to me. You see, there's a Navy SEAL by the name of Eric Greitens, and he wrote a book called Resilience. And he said, in your life, you don't need to know what perfect looks like, you just need to know what better looks like. Have you ever had a time in your life when something wasn't right? You didn't like the wrapping, but you were able to take something from it. Something from it that was beneficial. Something from it that even if you didn't like everything else, you took something. See, I needed my mom's lesson because when I walked through those prison doors, of course I didn't like the wrapping, right? I had to walk in, I had to trade in my clothes for an orange jumpsuit, sit in a jail cell. But thanks to those words echoing in my mind from my mother, I became a tutor in the prison, and I'll explain more about that later. I helped other inmates get their high school diplomas. I helped them write their parole board letters. When I got out of jail, when I was paroled in 2018, I was unemployed, I got fired from the RCMP. But I didn't need to know what perfect looks like. What better looked like for me was I packed my car full of groceries. And I drove around schools in my neighborhood. And I delivered food for school lunch programs. The organization that I work for, we took food to schools, and for kids that didn't have enough to eat for lunch, we gave food to the kids. And listen, that's not because I'm so great, it's because I remembered my mother saying, you know what, in life, don't focus on the wrapping, look for the gift. So you'll notice the first box is what I call reframing. See, we're going to talk about 6 R's today. 6 R's to building resilience in yourself and resilience in others. And I want you to think of your sandpaper story. A time in your life when something wasn't perfect, but you were able to take something out of it that was a benefit. And it doesn't have to be a huge story. But when we come up with these things, these stories, these things that we've had in our life, those times when we've taken gifts out of wrappings, ugly wrappings, when we share those with our kids, with the people around us, they see that we were resilient and they become more resilient as well because we modeled it for them.